Okay, well, again, thanks to the Intersection team. It's wonderful to be part of a group of architects from all over. So I'll just quickly go on to the sort of five things that five themes that I've chosen for today, and we'll start with community. And this is a wonderful Nigerian artist, a person called Cyrus Kabiru. And this was at the Kochi Biennale this year. He was featured, and he had these very large prints of himself with these wonderful eyeglasses. And they're just incredible. They're made out of sort of waste, mostly, waste that he's found in the dumps, and sort of puts together for these really wonderful sets of eyeglasses. And so someone asked him about these glasses, so what, there are no lenses in these glasses, are they, what are these meant to be? And he said that they're not really to see better, but they're really to see differently. And as architects, we work in whether you like it or not, in large teams with a lot of people, apart from your clients and contractors themselves, also consultants, but also all of the people at the site, the guys who are doing the bar bending or the shuttering for concrete. They're all participants in this exercise together. And there's a great, hope and optimism to be drawn from that our work is predicated on this coming together of many people. And so, what we don't learn in school so much, and which is, a sort of harsh introduction to reality when you come out as an architect, is this understanding that the work that you do is the coming together of a lot of people and their points of view and their ideas of the world. Your contractors and clients and everybody who's working on the project together. And how do you find consensus? And really the architect, to some extent nowadays, the PMC is taken on that role, but the architect really is the one who drives the coming together or the assimilation of all of these disparate points of view to make something meaningful out of this assimilation of, different eyeglasses or different ways in which people are seeing the world. And so not only outside of our office, but even within the office, working with our own staff, etc., we are hoping to create an environment where everybody's contributing and feeling sort of the feeling an open environment in which that they can contribute and create something that is a bit of their point of view as well. And this wonderful painting by Sudhir Patwardhan, the Mumbai-based radiologist / artist. It's another, just like Cyrus Kabiru's painting, this one is wonderful because everybody in this mega city, it's called the city, has their own point of view. So the man drinking tea is sort of lost in his, thought of his life. The guy in the white shirt is looking somewhere else. The person in the bus is looking straight back at us. There are people on the mezzanine looking elsewhere. And really our work as an architect is the work of consensus, of building consensus and working together with people. And that's the genesis of our name as well. 100 Hands is a sort of symbolic mean. It takes its meaning from this idea that there are many voices that is behind our work, and not just my voice or Sunni's voice. So this is our team. This is a bit older. This photograph, many have sort of since moved on, but yeah, this is our trip to Pondicherry and Auroville. This is, I think, 2 years ago. So this is a bunch of interns, but also a lot of our architects together. And on the right-hand side is Sunni, my wife and partner, who, we started this practice together. And she was also my junior in college. And like all good or obvious architecture romances, it started at NASA. So this is our GSEN trophy winning or citation winning NASA team in Bhopal. This is 1994. There's Sunni, second from the front. And there's me with the beard. And the rest of our team, Harish and Rashmi and Varsha and Radha, all of us, and we, from the provinces, from Bangalore, from far afield, in a place where, really there was really no conversation about architecture. It was fantastic to have won this recognition at a national level, and it was the first time that we'd ever got a citation at NASA. And so this is a big landmark for our own college, but also for all of us who were sort of finding our way in this sort of complex and wonderful world of architecture. So we've done a study in Udupi, and I remember Anand Bhatt was at Bhopal at that point. He was teaching at CEPT, and he invited us to Ahmedabad. Us sort of hillbillies from from way afield, going to Sept and presenting our work at what was hallowed ground. So this was a big sort of, it kind of changed things for all five of us, all six of us, and also the large team that worked on these projects. And that was really BMS. BMS college where I went to in Bangalore. There's a wonderful word that Brian Eno, the great producer, who made a lot of music with U2 and also produced Bob Dylan's new albums. Brian Eno came up with this word called seniors, and he says that in our day and age, really, this concept of the lone master, the lone genius who's producing work sort of in isolation. It's really not the way things are being made in the world anymore, and we know that more so now than before. That it takes a scene, it takes the coming together of all kinds of wonderful people, wonderful influences, and so this time at BMS was an incredible time. The 90s, the late 80s and early 90s. There was a fantastic group of people. A third person from the left is Nagraj Vastare, who was kind of a fantastically evolved, wonderful architect. He's still, he's a professional now and has his own practice. But at that time, he was really the one who was sort of guiding us. He was in fifth year when we were in third year. But this is the group, right? All of us together, working together and finding our way as a group. And as students, those of who are in the audience today, this is the great lesson that we're seeking our realization actually through these exchanges with our friends, through peers, through people who are navigating this world, lost in some sense, but also finding ways in which to understand and assimilate. Of course, our teachers as well, but I think it was really this group of peers together working primarily on NASA. And then, of course, year after that, for 3 or 4 years, we started getting, these citations and awards at the national level. So it was really a wonderful time at BMS at that point. The second person from the left is Vimal Jain, who was a crucial part of this group of our young students at BMS. And he passed on, falling down at a construction site a few years ago. And we made a foundation in Vimal Jain's in his name. And as part of that foundation now, a group of us work to host events. So the year after Vimal Jain had passed away, we invited Charles Correa and Jyotindra Jain for a discussion on art in the city. It was fantastic. For once, we started thanking the Lord for the terrible traffic we have in Bangalore, because it meant that, I was driving him around and we would be stuck in these interminable traffic jams. And we would talk about everything under the sun. Correa was just the most incredibly inquisitive, curious, and absolutely optimistic man. I mean, it was a fantastic time. So we announced a workshop as part of this first Vimal Jain Foundation event. Everybody, we had over 500 applications for the workshop, because everybody thought that, Charles Correa was going to conduct the workshop. He wasn't. But the 4 tutors who came for the workshop on that first day, this is Shoumitra's idea, Shoumitra Ghosh, Matthew and Ghosh. He made these masks of Korea so that the students wouldn't be unduly disappointed. It was very funny. So Vijay Narnapati, Prashant Paul, Nagraj Vastare, and Shoumitra Ghosh were the 4 tutors for the workshop. It was a one-day workshop asking questions about one of Korea's buildings in the city and what happens to the public space that is within it, the Vishweshwaraya Towers of the LIC building. We've also held a couple of workshops at IIM where you stay on campus, and we've had these 2 wonderful, wonderful teachers, Peter Stutchberry and Richard Laplace, who came, spent a week staying with the students and architects on campus, and then taking a small project on campus. But really, it's the excuse to hang out with really wonderful, mature, and wise people, and learning not only about architecture, but about conducting oneself in life and, things like that. And Richard is just a fantastic sage. So we had this twice. The first time, of course, Richard, Peter, and Doshi. Doshi came for the last 3 days. The second time we had it in 2018, we had Madhura Prema Tilake joined them, and we had Neil McLaughlin, the wonderful English architect, to come for the 3 days for the juries and things at the end. So it was wonderful to hold that. And then very recently in 2019, we had this event again, the Vimal Jain Foundation, at one of the buildings that we've designed. where we celebrated Doshi's life and work, and saw glimpses of a new film that my brother had made. But we also invited practicing architects and academics to talk about the impact that Doshi's had on their life. It was a very, very wonderful sort of evening with Champaka, Shomitro, Sanjay Mohe, and Navnath Kanade, talking about Navnath, of course, famously working with Doshi very early on, working on Prema Bai Hall, etc. So just telling us about, and that's another sort of suggestion to the young architects. Find people who inspire you. Try to understand what how they sort of operate, what kind of how they look at the world, because all of that enriches your own position in the world, your own sort of take on what is around you. And so we've been really actively trying to seek out these masters, and they're all around us. People like Mohe or Kanade, even Shomitra and Champaka, they all have embedded in them, a sort of profound sense of the world and how to engage with it. And so the more time we engage with them, the better off we are in sort of, maturing ourselves. So that's Vimal Jain Foundation. The second theme is meaning. And usually when we introduce ourselves as architects, of course, initially people are all very thrilled. They're in the company of someone really creative, who's, if you go by the movies, who has a convertible and is waltzing in the Alps in the summers. But very soon the conversation, at least my experience has been that the conversation comes down to, what happened to architecture. Like you look at the old temples, this is Melkote on the left-hand side, and there's a certain sort of what Charles Correa would call deep structure, something that everybody who goes to Melkote immediately connects with it, and it resonates with them at some fundamental level. Whereas architecture rarely, if ever, does it now, with newer buildings. Of course, there are fine architects who are doing wonderful contemporary work, but by and large, our cities are made of buildings that don't really mean much and don't really resonate with any of us. And why is that? What is the challenge? What is maybe the fundamental challenge? And there's a wonderful book called Eyes of the Skin that Palasma, the great Finnish architect and academic, wrote a few years ago. This is, I think, in 2002. I'm sorry, I'm missing a two. Eyes of the Skin basically says that, the hold on one second. Yeah, it says the dominance of the eye and the suppression of the other senses tend to push us into detachment, isolation, and exteriority. Modernist design at large has housed the intellect and the eye, but has left the body and other senses, as well as our memories, imagination, and dreams, on this. So I think at the bottom of everything, this notion that we're completely sort of pandering to the eye, that everything that we do, we want to know what it's going to look like on Instagram. We're interested in what it's going to look like in a magazine. And we rarely think of it, or at least going by what you see around your cities, our cities, we rarely think of architecture in terms of an embodied experience where you're in space and experiencing it fully, in terms of what you feel, what memories they evoke, sense of balance or ego, the sense of touch, the sense of smell. It's just because a lot of our work is driven by this notion of the two-dimensional flat land, the sense of what it looks like if you look at it. And the eye is a dangerous ally. I mean, so this is a painting by Magritte where he draws a pipe and he writes under it, "This is not a pipe," in French. And so you're wondering, you're looking at that painting and you're wondering if the drawing of the pipe or the word pipe that is written below, which of these is true? And in fact, our eyes are fooling us in both regards, because neither is the image true, neither is the word true. They're both symbols of some sort. And really, if you want to have a real pipe, you have to be able to touch it, you have to be able to smoke, etc., etc. And so this engagement with the object, the embodied engagement with the object, is really crucial for it to really resonate and connect with us. And so by the same yardstick, architecture too needs to give you that fully embodied experience that then resonates and gives you a way to, for it to, give you a sense of meaning, evoke your memory, etc., etc. And meaning has various levels also. I mean, for instance, if you look at the old the tombs that the Mughals built, the tombs were sort of a simulacrum of the Garden of Eden. And so every articulation, every, architectural gesture had this reference back to that meaning or to that allusion to the Garden of Eden. So this is a close-up of the Taj Mahal, and you can see on the left-hand side that all of the articulation of this wonderful building has to do with that, of evoking the sense that you're in this wonderful, garden where Shah Jahan and Mumtaz are waiting to be taken away by Gabriel. And so the second one is Mother Mary, and you must have seen this 1,000 times. Mother Mary is usually painted with a blue cloak. It's also a reference to the Mother Teresa blue. I mean, there's this blue somehow has become the notional color, at least in Christianity, the notion that it's connected to the heavenly entities, that it has a certain nobility about it. And really, it has a very prosaic beginning. I mean, blue, the ultramarine pigment was the most expensive pigment in the day. And so the more blue there was in the painting, it meant the more expensive, or the more money the sponsor had spent in commissioning the painting. And so from starting at this very prosaic level, it now gets connected to nobility and to the higher, more finer sort of qualities embedded in Mother Mary and in divinity. And so sometimes meaning can come from really prosaic beginnings as well. And the third one is what I spoke about Charles Correa talking about deep structure, that when you come to a place like this is Nandi Hills, the temple at the foot of the Nandi Hills, Gogi Nandishwara temple, and you come here, and we bring guests here from all over the world to come, and invariably we come to this small kund. It's not a very large place, but it's something about it that, and this is, I mean, you find them a dime a dozen across the country, but we can't really say that for a lot of the modern architecture that we see. And what is this about the deep structure, that you come to a place like this? Is it harking back, or is it reminding you of all of our shared history of people digging into the ground for water? Is there some sort of archaic memory that is being evoked by these places, a memory that we've forgotten but comes back to us when we come to a place that resonates like that? So what is it about places that, and sometimes it's difficult to articulate, it's difficult to describe, but the connection is visceral and obvious. And so three kinds of meanings, from the sort of very prosaic to the deeply sort of metaphysical or philosophical. But this idea of meaning is also sort of slowly losing, because the meaning is also connected to place. And so in the old days, when you looked at, you looked at a church, and the Stations of the Cross, the 14 places where when Pontius Pilate, convicts Jesus, and Jesus is going up to the hill to get crucified, he's carrying his own cross, and he's making his way up. There are sort of 14 stages of that journey that he makes, and either he falls down, or someone gives him water, someone helps him, gives him a hand, and of course at the end of which he's crucified on the hill. And so these Stations of the Cross, the paintings themselves depict these instances of Jesus's journey from Pontius Pilate to crucifixion. And so the art and the liturgy and the message that is being conveyed within the church are interrelated, are intrinsically connected. And so when you're in the building, you look at the art, and immediately the message of the art is immediately apparent, and the stories are immediately apparent to anyone viewing them. This is true for so many of our temples as well, where either the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, mostly the Ramayana, is depicted in wonderful sort of drawings all around the temple. And so the liturgy, or the message of these lessons, or the messages of these these epics, are immediately sort of transferred through these drawings. We've the Medicis in the 19th century, they took these paintings out of the church. They started populating their villas and their palaces with these paintings, a lot of them religious paintings that were now taken out of the religious context and placed in secular space. And so now what happens is that when the paintings are removed from that connection to that location, of course, most of the meanings do stay, but the conversation now shifts from meaning to technique. And this has happened in architecture as well. We no longer talk about meanings, philosophical or metaphysical or even prosaic. We talk mostly about technique, about green, methods of green or construction. All of them are important, but we've sort of stopped talking about the other sort of more deeper connections that our work needs to make. And so I think the Medicis and the shift from of course we've gone way past the Medicis today, and art is everywhere, or at least the simulation of art. And so what do we make of things like that? And this is true of architecture as well. So you take something that exists for a very particular reason, 1930s Manhattan, a particular condition of real estate, a particular condition of building bylaws, a particular notion of how people are going to travel with the Zeppelins coming up and docking onto that large spire that is on top of the Empire State Building. And we take all of those which are coming from sort of very definite contextual conditions, and we make our own versions of that architecture only because of the symbol that these buildings so this is another kind of meaning where Vijay Mallya, when he built the UBCD tower, is making a very, very sort of distinct proposition about his place in the city, his place as an emperor, if you will, on the UB empire and on the country itself, with interest in all kinds of businesses. So really the building evoking his ambitions as an empire builder, as a person of a certain standing. But what does it mean? I mean, what, apart from this notion of power and this direct, a copy paste sort of condition, what other embedded meanings can be derived from architecture like that? And I'd like to think about that in some sense, because, if you look at Cannes, for instance, look at Leonardo da Vinci's drawing and think of all of the mosques or churches that you've been to where fantastic domes and arches make the roof of these buildings. And this notion of the dome or the arch is really the notion of the heavens, where you don't see, the distinctions of vertical and horizontal, that the definition of the roof is not very clear. And so it seems infinite, and really to then evoke the sense that you're under the heavens, under the benign light of God. And when Khan makes his wonderful, he talks about spiritual light, he talks about, and in a way he's bringing back what the Medicis had taken away from art. He's bringing art back into a space of spiritual significance in the choice of the art, in the choice of how the light floods into that. So of course there are utilitarian ways in which to describe this wonderful light within the museum, but I think there's also a notion of spirituality and a notion of evoking a sense that is just not utilitarian. So Khan's wonderful building in Texas, the Kimball Art Museum. And meaning does not really have to be that, profound. This is Aalto. This is his summer house in Finland. And of course, Finland gets really cold. Imagine that it's -2 degrees Celsius, and poor Aalto is making his way across to the summer house. And when he sees this wonderful brick wall, all made with bricks, brought in from Italy and from the south of Europe, and he makes this wonderful wall with all kinds of different patterns. It almost looks like it's a transect of an old Italian village. And there's the blue of the Mediterranean through a window, complete with a lintel. And so Aalto is just, making this wall to remind him of his time on a warm beach somewhere on the Mediterranean, enjoying, a wonderful day out in the sun in the middle of winter. And so it's a wonderful wall that evokes for him a very personal memory of a time well spent in better sort of climate. So things can also be very personal, and one doesn't really have to always have a profound sort of sense of what things are. One can just evoke the qualities that one wants to in the work that one does, to bring back memories of better things. So I'll start. This is one of our recent projects. It's a school that we did for Kavita Gupta and Neve Academy. And of course, when you start with a school, almost all of us think of our traditional sort of education, or at least the sort of vernacular idea, or the sort of historic idea of how schools were, the master under the tree with all of his pupils. And then Khan's wonderful evocation of that same condition where the teacher and the student are sitting at the same level under this wonderful benign tree, exchanging realizations without knowing who's the teacher and who's the student. And really, if I come back to our NASA times, or with our times, and talking about seniors, a wonderful school offers you the opportunity of these wonderful exchanges of company, of growing together with your peers. and finding meaning through that. And so there's a wonderful drawing that shows Tansen and his guru and Akbar sort of under the benign cover of a wonderful tree. And so when we were doing this school, we were thinking of that. And that sketch on the top right tells you that we were thinking, wouldn't it be lovely if I had a nice roof that hovered over a very, very sort of articulated and complex set of spaces for congregation, so that there were places for large groups to congregate and smaller groups to congregate, but all protected by a lovely roof that then gave you cover. And in Bangalore, because we've got very, very benign weather almost all through the year, that you just let all the breezes through, and it'll be a lovely time all through the year to enjoy. So that section at the bottom right is that lovely roof that's hovering over a shaded internal volume that has all kinds of volumetric changes, so that different scales are offered to the students to congregate and get together with their friends. Some sketches of that sort of some early ideas of what that roof could be like, and the nature of this assembly of blocks underneath. And it's I mean, of course, it also was a lot of credit to our clients who drove this idea that 50-60% of the building was outside of the classrooms, that there were just places that really didn't have much definition, like Khan would say, that they were just spaces that then the faculty and the students invented ways in which to occupy and use these spaces. These are the plans. I'm going to run through this. So it's very simple. It's on a grid, and so we're just moving things around, to create open space or create terraces. And here are some pictures. It's got a metal roof which hovers over the whole space, and the metal roof casts very nice shadows during the morning. And there's a gap that separates what is the sort of prosaic part of the campus or the building, where the parents and the administration sits, and then you cross sort of figuratively a moat. You cross over the threshold into what is sacred space of the school. And there's this water body. We had a wonderful landscape architect, Varna Dhar, who did the landscape. And of course, it's a lot more lush now, and I don't have new pictures, but it's really a vibrant threshold that one crosses to get into, and then when you're inside, you can kind of see the roof above there, and all kinds of spaces of varying scales for kids to use and enjoy. So it's, that's some pictures of the space itself with this north light roof. It's a simple sawtooth roof with, either a double grid or a single grid of tensile fabric spanning with the north light and bringing in a very, very sort of comfortable yellow light into that space. Here are some more pictures of that internal volume. So yeah, I mean, very simple sort of building, just with this wonderful roof that then gives you cover. This is another school which is very, very, it's just sort of getting completed. It's also in Bangalore. And this is a very, very sort of different client, a much more conventional sort of client. But here too, we were able to really create an internal, quality which evokes what we've done at Neve. So when you look at it from the outside, it's a very simple building. It's got, it almost looks like it's a doubly loaded corridor with rooms on either side. And so you enter the building, there's gardens, etc., that then pierce this very simple organization of the plan. But once you come in, you get a sense that the internal volume is really in a sense, a participatory space. Different kinds of terraces, again, looking out and onto and being looked onto by people, so that you're always participating in this shared space, with others. And being part of that community. So here are some pictures of that internal volume, which really has quite a nice, sense of scale and light, flooding that internal volume of the building. And so it's quite a surprise coming in from the outside to discover this very rich internal sort of quality in the building. We come to the third, which is time and frame. And the frame, and in the case of architecture, I'd say that it's time, this frame. And the frame, if I look at artists across history, artists have been trying to, go beyond the flat land of the painting for the longest time. And so though art is predominantly consumed by the eye, it gives you a sense, these paintings give you a sense of depth, which which is really wonderful, and which tells you that even if you're limited by flatland, you can go so much beyond. And so Caravaggio on the left-hand side, this is Jesus. He's just been sort of resurrected. He's come out. Doubting Thomas is checking Jesus to check if it's really him. He's actually touching because he's not trusting his eyes. But look at the way that Caravaggio paints that, really sepulchral scene. There are, of course, they're being hunted down by the Romans, and so it's steeped in this inky black, as if all of those shadows are people who are looking at these traitors and going to report them to the Romans. So it's really a sort of quite a sort of sinister sort of scene. And on the right-hand side, this is Monet painting water lilies, which he did for a long number of years, later on in life. But the wonderful thing about these paintings is that they're sort of meditative, because you look and gaze into this painting, and it seems like the depth of that water is indeterminate, and you're just looking at it, and you can find, every time you look at it, you find that there's something deeper and deeper, and it's almost drawing you into a state of trance. And you're going so much beyond the flatland of the painting itself. This is a piece again from the Kochi Biennale, again breaking the frame in incredible ways. This is by Shilpa Gupta, and I mean, it's a room with, it was called, for In Your Tongue, I Cannot Hide, 100 Jail Poets. So she took 100 poems which were either, which were censored, or, they were not allowed to be printed, etc., because they were sort of volatile and incendiary. And she took these poems and stuck them on these spikes and hung microphones from the top. But the microphones aren't microphones really, they're speakers embedded in those microphones. So as you make your way through this installation, whispered out of these microphones are the voices of the poets sort of reciting these poems. And the moment you enter the room, it feels like you're part of the revolution, that you've come into this secret meeting of these censored poets, and you're participating in that rebellion against authority. So it's a really wonderful, almost transportational piece of work, where you're coming into a room and feeling like you're out of yourself in another environment, in this space where nobody is there, and yet all of these ideas are floating around. It's a wonderful piece, which again breaks the frame. Munoz, again, a wonderful piece from the Tate Modern. It's a room filled with these identical figures, all with sort of strange Asian features. Look at them. They've been cut off at the ankles. And so when you walk into the room, you're taller than them. It looks like you're on a catwalk. You're walking through this, and everybody's looking back at you, and they know something about you, something really compromising. And you feel for a moment that he's flipped the viewer and the viewed, the art and the person who's observing. And it's a really disconcerting sort of, it sort of shakes you up a little bit, because you feel totally uncomfortable for a moment to be in this room where you're being viewed by all of these figures, and they're all laughing and smiling, and it seems like they know something really compromising about you. So it's really, I mean, great art does that. It sort of shakes you up a little bit and makes you think again about your own reality and about your own beliefs and things like that. So Munoz is fantastic. Alvar Balasubramaniam talking about the notion of permanence. And the idea is, sorry, hold on one second. Yeah, so he makes these busts are made out of odonil, and so over time the busts dissipate. Odonil is the air freshener, and so what was once visually consumed is now consumed through the nose. And so really Balasubramanian is talking about what is it that we define as art. Does it have to have that kind of quality of permanence? Does it have to be seen by the eye? Are there other modes in which we appreciate and consume art? And also the permanence of the artifact. So if I'm buying this piece, what am I buying? And so can art be bought, etc. So wonderful questions about what is of value. This thing about time is also the juxtaposition of things, and how you give relatively a notion of what is old and what is new. So the garden on the left in the Ryonji temple, which is raked every day, the gravel is raked every day, and that wall, which is 15th century, which has got a patina which has never been painted. Excuse me. So it's gathering this this patina over a long period of time, whereas the raking happens every day. And so immediately jammed up against each other is the notion of time, a really sort of idea of temporality, what is happening daily and what is happening over centuries. And the same is true through, of these wonderful rangolis that you see in front of so many of our houses, but also in front of, old institutions, old temples. And immediately it gives you a sense of time because it's juxtaposed so directly, the old sort of structure and this sort of constantly, renewed art which is being done on the floors. Simple examples of that sort of idea of time and juxtaposition, Salk Institute, the timber, of course, now it's all been fixed up and apparently the same timber, etc., has been used. And so it looks new again. But when I went there, it was really sort of, falling apart, all of the sea breezes, etc. And this wonderful teak now almost sort of grayed out completely. But this robust concrete frame and this really sort of temporal enclosures where the researchers sit, it's a wonderful thing to see these two materials together and to know that at some point all of this timber will fall away. And really what Khan was off after, the wonderful ruins he saw in Rome, that really this then will become like those Roman ruins, just structure and light, and there will be nothing else left. The IIM Bangalore, this is a picture from the 80s. Nothing's been planted yet. And of course, when you go there today, it's completely obfuscated by landscape. What a wonderful sort of symbiosis between architecture and landscape, that now that architecture with a capital A completely sort of taken over by the landscape, and sort of completely a new reading for this wonderful place. IIM is just one of the most amazing places like that, aging gracefully over time. The notion of time, I think I'll skip this. This is a painting again, which juxtaposes two time frames up against. So Jesus from, very early on, but then even in the way that people are dressed, in the way that the perspective works, and also in the associations the painter is trying to make between the innocence of Jesus and the innocence of the Duke who's on the right hand side, who was killed by these two people on either side of him. And so by making the juxtaposition across time in the same painting, he's trying to give value to the Duke, and make that relationship with Jesus. And the painting immediately evoked for me, the Noise Museum that Chipperfield did in Berlin, that by putting together and by consciously not dressing up what is old and by delicately inserting the new, you gave the old thing a renewed sort of appreciation, that you were giving it a new currency because of the way that you were integrating the new artifact in the old. And so a wonderful piece of conservation where the older pieces, even with all of its plaster flaking off, with all of the bullet holes and the ammunition damage, that all of this pristine newness highlights or brings out even further the quality and the ravages of the war. So it's a wonderful way in which to engage with the old. But this idea of time also is something that, a lot of us architects are looking back constantly at history to look at ways in which people dealt with certain things. Maybe I'll skip this, but this is from an essay that Colin Rowe wrote called The Mathematics of the Ideal Villa. And he compares these two buildings, one by Corbusier from the 1920s and one by Palladio from 1554. And he makes direct parallels between these two plans. They're almost identical in dimension. They're almost identical in the way that they're organized, but they're fundamentally different in how structure gives you a sense of meaning and a sense of order within the building. So Cobb probably looking at Palladio, but then moving, in a different direction after this reference. It's a wonderful essay if you guys can get a hold of it. This is a study that we did for Alsur. This is an old bazaar street in Alsur. There's a wonderful team in the office who made all of these wonderful drawings, Surabhi and Harriet and a whole bunch of others. But it's just a study that says that, usually when we do a study of these kinds of places in the center of our old cities, we look at the architecture and we usually draw the architecture in ways that it doesn't register all of the detritus of urban life, the things that are attached onto these buildings, the temporary installations that people make to inhabit again what is very old in the city. And so by looking at these artifacts that people were making, we were wondering, is the future of urbanity and future of architecture a much more temporal one, something that is much more ephemeral and constantly changing, easily deployable, almost like something from the Blade Runner, that it was that the old structures just formed an armature on which then you could plug in all kinds of things that appropriated the sky above, open space in the front, and appropriated again these public spaces for private inhabitation. We've also now been using steel in a lot of our buildings with the explicit idea that this is a renewable, one can sort of dismantle, take it away, use it elsewhere, etc. That steel may have an inherent resilience. Of course, there is a lot of energy in the making of steel itself, but at least it has an afterlife, unlike concrete. And so that's a building in Whitefield. It's a retail building, but we're also now working on a project for the Indian Institute of Science, where a lot of the structure is in steel, and we're thinking of this kind of building which then can be renewed or recycled, or can be, that components can be used later for other things, or that it's easier to imagine an afterlife for these things. Context, Milton Glaser, the great graphic designer from New York, he passed away today, just remembering him today, but this wonderful art, piece of art that he made, that somehow the old and the new, that we often think of the new coming out of a vacuum, that somehow it will come out of nowhere or out of nothing. And in fact, the new is completely entangled with the old, and that the new comes out of the old. It's a new way in which the old is looked at. It evolves from that understanding. And even Rushdie in his defense of satanic verses says, melange, hodgepodge, a bit of this and a bit of that is how newness enters the world. And so it really is this kurma that we are, and so all architects, all young students, etc. One must try to find one's own particular conditions, and really the work of architecture is that recognition of who you are yourself, and that from that recognition is where the really truly new thing comes. So that's context. And these wonderful, there are two pictures here, but the first one is of course Patwardhan again, painting an Irani cafe. This is right after the emergency, 1970s. And look at the way that he draws it. I mean, in the mirrors and in the windows, etc., you can see the bustling life of the city, almost in opposition to the thing. There's color, there's life, there's monotony and discussion. But the Irani cafe owner himself, now part of that context, almost made out of marble, like the marble tops of the Irani cafe. He's almost become part of the scenery in that. It's a wonderful comment on context and this permanence of these institutions, that the people themselves become part of these institutions. But context is also interesting because, I mean, a picture like this is from Gautam Bhatia's Silent Spaces, and it is immediately unsettling as an image, because there's something so fundamentally in opposition to the character and the message of this great man and the clothes that he is now depicted in this image is wearing. And so that's really what, who are we? What are our predilections? What are our prejudices? And what are our values? And each one of us, through a lifetime searching for those sort of themes that then inform our work, so that we become who we were meant to be. And so this picture of Gandhi's really, it resonates with me because it immediately tells me that fundamentally, there's something wrong with it. And what is that? What is that? And everything about Gandhiji's message sort of then in opposition to this image. Talking about context, this is a reference to Bijoy Jain's wonderful lecture that he gave in Rome on Louis Kahn's work, and he talked about Dhaka, the Parliament House in Dhaka, and what a poetic way in which he describes this building sitting at the end of the sort of the Gangetic Plain, coming all the way down to the Bay of Bengal, and this beautiful building that then is revealed as the floods recede, and the floods marking the building. Those wonderful marble inlays that Kahn makes on the building, that they're the markings of the receding flood. And this beautiful gem is then revealed as the floods, receded at the delta. It's a most poetic reading. Of course, Kahn probably didn't think of it, but for us to bring to bear in the reading of architecture, these profound meanings, that somehow this is the perfect articulation of a building on the delta, that somehow it has the sense of being made of water. Of course, Khan famously was also trying to hide the joints of each of the lifts of concrete with the marble, but that's the utilitarian expression. One is also thinking about this, Bijoy Jain's wonderful poetic rendition of what it means. We did a building in Trichy a few years ago, finding everything about this building from an understanding of that particular context, the quality of that wonderful brick, using it to make all of the walls, saving money because of it, and addressing the heat because of it. So in the recognition of that one material, we were able to address all of those challenges that we were facing on this site: the cost, the temperature, and the availability of material and labor. And sometimes all of those come together in one sort of simple, evocative way. And this building really captures that sort of, and of course, all credit to a wonderful engineer, Manimaran and Rajendran, the two engineers who were responsible for this building and who really drove the choices that we made for the building. And the reason why it looks the way it looks is because of Manimaran and Rajendran informing fundamentally what these buildings are about. We did a building in a stone place where they process granite, and the south face of the building is covered with this stone screen, almost evoking a timber detail in terms of how it's hung. We'd probably never be able to do this again just because of the sheer cost of doing it, but because of that context and the availability to the machinery that they had on that site, we were able to do something really sort of unusual and surprising with them. This is Caesar, all of 24 years old, probably his first commission. He was working with a friend of his, and then his friend went away and he was going to do this project. But this is a fantastic exposition on what is context. And so look at the church, which is sitting on the edge of that landmass, right on the edge of the ocean. And the church is sort of looking away from the ocean. It's completely devoid of any windows. It flattens out the land, from the rock so that you get a nice plinth on which to set the building. And so what does that mean? I mean, the building is basically saying that this location and everything around it is not what the truth is, that you have to come into this building and experience the truth inside, that the liturgy will then redeem you, that inside this building is actually the truth and everything outside is just sort of, a distraction. So the building really could have been anywhere. It creates nothing of this context because really it derives its meaning from what is within it and from the message that is going to be given to you inside. Whereas when Caesar does his secular restaurant sitting right there on the same context as the church, but now driven by a completely different agenda in terms of context. Here's a building which celebrates its context. It takes all of the terrain to create all of those plinths on which you walk up, and it's oriented completely in the other direction towards the water, and really a building about windows rather than walls. So if you go on to the other side of this building, it's basically just a very large window that you then look out onto the ocean, and the walls are almost part of the landscape, and the roof just floats above this glass, giving you a look out onto the landscape. Both are valid because both are inherently driven by the question of nature, what Khan spoke about. What is the nature of the building that I'm designing? This is Murcutt in Australia, a beautiful building. I did a master class with Richard and Peter, but also with Murcutt and Britt Anderson and Lindsay. And really the idea of the master class is that you spend 2 weeks with these great masters and really sort of absorb what the context is about. So there's Glenn's beautiful building that sits perpendicular to the Shoalhaven River, which looks out onto the place where the river bends and goes sort of southward, or rather eastward. It heads east from south. And it's a beautiful building that sits out, looking out onto that wonderful landscape. And you spend 2 weeks drawing, assimilating what that context is about, and locating a building on that site. So this was we have 5, 6 of us in a team making a proposition. So on the left-hand side is Murcutt's building, and then we created this new sort of structure on the right-hand side, completely in response to the existing contours. We also worked on a competition entry for the Nalanda University. I'm going to run through this real quick. But what's interesting about Nalanda University, this is the ancient university, 5th century. It's a beautiful set of, brick enclosures. So they've got courtyards, there's cells around these courtyards, and there are these archetypal forms on the landscape, each assembly of cells and courtyards almost typical and sort of repeated on that land. These are wonderful terraces on which to stand and look out onto the horizon. It evokes what Utzon talked about, the notion. Jon Utzon, who designed the Sydney Opera House, he spoke about platforms as a way to sort of elevate yourself, get a sense of control over your destiny and over the landscape. That they were incredibly empowering sort of places to occupy. And so the platform really now raising you above the landscape and giving you a sense of survey. And so this is the site in Nalanda, which we did the competition with Allies and Morrison, the British company, 500 acres. We didn't win the competition. Vastu Shilpa Consultants won the competition. But this was our proposal. We had a really wonderful time working on it. A very simple sort of grid-like plan diagram first, that you had maybe two ways in which to enter the site, sort of grid on that landscape. And number two, the plan distorted is really a response to the conditions of the site itself. We were trying to make connections to existing villages. We were orienting now the grid so that the particular geometries of the site were registered, the way water was coming onto that site was registered, and finding a way to occupy that site through this very rational process of grids and blocks. But what was really interesting for me, and I think it's something that Allies and Morrison probably unconsciously sort of discovered, and they talk about it, but it evokes for me what Kahn's plans are like, Louis Kahn's plans. That if I look at the Nalanda plan on the left-hand side, you can see those archetypal blocks, each block with a set of cells all around, with an open courtyard in the middle. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of those sort of courtyard assemblies set out onto the landscape. And then there are the temples that are across those courtyard buildings. And what is really interesting for me, or at least when we visited, were these interstitial spaces between these archetypal forms. That if you look at the picture in the middle, these are the wonderful ways in which the space between these very pure shapes were articulated with terraces, with geometries that were not particularly orthogonal, and that had landscape, and that they were shaded because of the dimensions of these interstitial spaces, that they became completely functional, but also they evoked a great quality of assembly and congregation. And so actually Allies and Morrison's plan takes the cue from, of course, Kahn, but also from Nalanda University's plan, that really the plan is made out of these very, very simple blocks, but now located on the landscape to respond to the geography and contours of the landscape, but also creating a scale that then one can occupy and enjoy, that it is really about simple buildings, but complex and wonderful open spaces between them. So just the four principles of the scheme, the idea of connections between, the villages, the idea that there was an asymmetry, that on one side of the site was a hill, on the other side were, the villages, and that there was in the plan prospect onto one end and sort of refuge on the other. This idea of density, that really it was like a city, it was mixed use, that the housing wasn't in a different location, school in a different location, that they were all together like in a real city, and so that the campus was always alive through the day, that you didn't have, a diurnal change. This is one of the modules, so there were 7 schools, so we divided all of the program up by 7, and so each school had all of that housing, etc., as part of that one module. And so the plan became a result of that module sort of repeated on the landscape. Here are some images of that and that central spine that terminated with the library and the tower. This is a hotel in Whitefield in Bangalore. I'm going to run through this real quick. It has a central spine. It opens out onto the east. Benign light, again with Allies and Morrison, the British architects who we did the Nalanda plan with, but a beautiful idea of an asymmetrical plan where the eastern side is completely, a direct connection to the landscape from inside the building. So there were no windows and doors, and you were able to get in and out of the building as if in a deep veranda. And so here's that, lower level with the interiors, etc., that we did, but a wonderfully benign, comfortable environment, just with the fans, no air conditioning. That you got and Bangalore, of course, we're very fortunate with this very temperate, climate. So it's very, very easy to imagine a place like this. This is looking back from the landscape into the space, and then the rooms themselves. all of it custom made, even the art procured locally. This is the 5th floor, and then the penthouse on top where the owner stays. And the last, I'm going to end with the nature. I hope I'm doing okay on time. So the nature, what is the nature of things? And so there isn't, I would like for, all of the students to understand, I mean, where we started, this idea that each of us, through the work of architecture, finding our own voice, finding our own meanings. And Magritte's great painting basically says that. So he paints these 4 icons. There's the horse, the clock, the jug, and the suitcase. But he writes under them the door, the wind, the bird, and the valise. And what is Magritte trying to say? He's saying that each of us looking at this art is bringing to bear our own memories, our own prejudices. So I look at that horse and I remember Horse Park. I remember my dad taking me when I was very young near Kolaba, spending the day riding the horse, then riding my scooter, then having kulfi outside. So for me, under that horse probably is, kulfi, or probably Horse Park, or probably the scooter, that the image evokes to us something that then, we bring to bear in the reading of the work. And so to constantly be sort of bringing to bear in our work our own sort of predilections, and to be aware of that is essential sort of as a creative person. And also the nature of things isn't a given. So the same kind of thing. So if I look at stone in the Pitti Palace, which is a very forbidding way in which, the travertine is used, it looks almost as if the Medicis brought the mountain itself to Florence to keep everybody out of the Pitti Palace, because this was now a private, palace. Whereas when Kahn uses the same stone, he slices that stone so fine, revealing all of the crevices and the holes, that the stone almost feels fragile, as if this building is porous, as if it's inviting you to come in. And so the same stone used, but look at the way that, it's done in Itmat Dwala. This is not travertine, it's marble. But now that stone is cut like a gauze. It looks like muslin, as if it's made out of cloth, and all of the breezes can flow through it, so that Mr. Itmat Dala, who's waiting in there for the angels to come, is in a beautiful environment where all of the breezes are flowing in from the Yamuna, and he can wait indefinitely because it's such a wonderful, pleasant place to stay. But the stone is being used to evoke a nature that you're defining at the outset. Is it about privacy? Is it about security? Is it about privacy? Is it about that nebulous relationship between public and private? Or is it about the breeze? Is it about, a wonderful, benign environment? What is the stone used to evoke? This is Kahn, again, in 1950, he was 50 years old, 51. He went on this famous trip. Everybody talks about it. He went to Rome and to Siena and to Egypt. And he made these drawings. And when he came back to America, he completely changed the way he worked. And this trip, a lot of people ascribe a lot of value to this trip and the way that he drew and saw things, that something in him sort of changed, and that he started thinking of his work more in terms of sort of essential things, in terms of light and structure, in terms of almost no embellishment, and in terms of robustness and heaviness. And some, we're all seeking that moment where, the lights turn on and something happens and the work then becomes more of an expression of who we are and what our values are. And so this trip, and so, as students, I mean, at the risk of antagonizing all of your teachers, I'd say, make as many trips as you can, draw, write, capture the feelings that you get in places, because those are your own personal readings of things, and they're as valuable as anyone else's. And they inform the way that you may then look at the world, and you discover yourself through these journeys. This is a small project that we did for a rock music, a set of rock musicians here. It's a small studio. And the nature of this coming really from a discussion with the client, that Bruce and Rajiv, our clients, really educating me in the way that, sound works, and having a good acoustical engineer, all of them bringing to bear in this collective. As an architect, you're bringing all of this information and creating then a plan that responds to these conditions. So there's the plan that we finally landed up with, these beautiful rooms which were completely acoustically treated. They were of that shape because they performed really well in that format, and all enclosed with a hollow brick, so that they were completely insulated. But none of this coming as capricious. but as an understanding of what the client is really telling you, so that you're hearing, listening, and learning from that feedback. So the work is not coming from me, but from this engagement with others. This is Monet, a famous Spanish architect working in Murcia, in Murcia, in the south of Spain. It's a beautiful project. This is basically just a prelude to our own public building. What is a public building? So he's got this site which is in the heart of Murcia. On the right-hand side, that big building is the chapel. This one, and then on the bottom there is the palace where the kings and queens lived, and on the top are all the bourgeoisie, the housing estates of the sort of middle class, the upper middle class. And the red block is the building that he put in, completing that sort of plaza in the heart of a medieval city. And so there's the chapel. I mean, there's the chapel, there's the palace on the right, and the 19th century housing on the left. The chapel is, I think, 16th century. But what's important of both these buildings, the palace and the chapel, are these retables. And these are you see the two columns on either side, and there are these statues in the middle of them. These are retables. They're called retables, and they're basically either the angels or the great benefactors, someone who sanctioned or gave money for the chapel. They're the people who find their, statues in the retables, and they're looking down on the plaza in a way, giving you sanction to use it. There's this real sort of power, an idea of power and an idea of sort of, subjugation in this kind of iconography. And the same is true for the palace. Once in a year, twice in a year, the king comes out onto those balconies, and now they are in position of power. They are in their own retables, looking down and giving you sanction for the use of this public amenity. And so when Monet does his building, he creates a building that is public access, but he creates his own retables. But now, rather than the kings and queens, it's you, the public, who are coming into this public facility, who have the possibility of standing in your own retables to look now down onto this plaza and give sanction for public life. So there's a real sort of comment on power and hegemony in Monet's building. So I'm ending with the BIC. The BIC is a project that we finished last year. It opened in February last year. It's a long, drawn-out process. We won the competition in 2012. It took 7 years to build this for various reasons. There were changes in the site. There was money problems. We had, a PIL, a public interest litigation challenged against the BIC, which was in the courts for some time. And so through this very long process of back and forth with the client, what was once, in the competition became something else at the end of it. And I'd like that to be the message of this project, that, the great, the work of architecture isn't really the work of, the mastermind who sits and makes the great sketch. It is this sort of messy negotiation that one has with one's clients and with the community that then comes as a result and is much more valuable because of that negotiation. So the questions, the sort of 4 fundamental questions of this building are: what is the nature of a public building? How does publicness find architectural expression? And given the mixed use program, there were all of these. There was an auditorium, there was, all kinds of program. How do you put these program elements together so that you get a society of rooms, something that these rooms are talking to each other, they're creating spaces for congregation, just like Neve or Ira, that there was this kind of participatory space as a result of the organization of program. And what are the particular conditions of this project, which we had to critically respond to, either the orientation, residential fabric, the canal, the park, whatever, but also designed by committee, that this was a committee that you were working with, and how do you find expression of that shared authorship with people? This was our competition scheme. I'm going to run right through this. But it was a very, very sort of bold and dramatic scheme. One of the committee members, I remember, wrote a very scathing letter after we were appointed as architects, saying that, here's another spaceship that's landed from wherever in Bengaluru, and what does it have to do with anything? And I think he put the jinx on it, he put the hex on it, and soon, the site proportions changed. We lost a floor. Everything started becoming an internal expression of that public space. So really that public terrace, which was on the 2nd floor, was the heart of this, that you got a sense of the publicness of this building right from the street, that it evoked the quality of congregation and everybody together. And now we had to put all of that within a box in a way, because of the lower height of the building, because, the site had compressed in dimension. And so how do we now find a new way to express that? And we went through a whole bunch of, exercises to do that. And finally, really, the project is about the nature of that, the idea of the society of rooms coming together to form open public space between that, is on multiple levels, and you're sharing this and getting a sense of community across the building. So here are some pictures. There's a drawing of the ground floor. This is a lovely drawing that Surabhi made, which tells you about the various layers that you encounter as you get into the building, from the frame to the common space and that wonderful brick wall we have inside. So there from the outside, not really revealing much of what is within the building. So it's got a sort of public face, a public scale. And then inside, of course, now in these COVID times, it's difficult to imagine or get your head around this kind of a scene with all of these people congregating together, etc. is something to think about. But the notion of public space, so from the competition scheme, which is the drawing on the top, where you get this kind of swath of yellow, which is all public space, to a much more embodied, much more sort of engaged sense of publicness within the building, which then everybody is sharing and sort of getting a sense of. So running through some photographs, this is that central sort of cascading section, which connects you all the way to the sky as you get into the building, the brick wall, the restaurant, all public, no program here. So they do all kinds of activities here, dance recitals, art exhibitions, storytelling. They use it for all kinds of events. Again, the same acoustical engineer as the Thermal Inner Quarter, the rock studio guys, now inflecting the inside of this auditorium to become completely a natural sound box. So each of these plywood panels are articulated in ways to deflect the sound so that you can get sound reaching without amplification right up to the last person in the audience. So it's very, very sort of, womb-like internal volume, all made out of ply, perforated in varying degrees depending on reflection or absorption. This is the upper floors. This is that section from above looking down towards the landscape and the terrace. So here are some glimpses of the scheme itself from 2012 to 2016. The kind of, we've got 18 different versions of this plan, slowly getting changed, mutilated, changed, altered, negotiated, compromised, till we come to the final scheme. And I was doing some reading about this wonderful project that Khan did for the Dominican Mother House. And this is over 2 years. So you can see the plan, he's struggling with the budget. He's struggling with an understanding of the commission. He starts off with sort of tropes from other projects. So 1966, the plan is very much, a kind of plan that, is embedded in the projects that he's doing in Dhaka and India. It's got almost the same size for the meeting hall. He's copy pasting certain things to create that plan. But you can see as he comes to 1968, the plan is completely sort of compressed. And in fact, what's really sophisticated about that plan is that it understands, or he understands, the essential condition of the Dominican order, the sisterhood, which said that there was no distinction between service and spirituality. And so this plan, which is unlike the first plan, where there is a definite distinction between the public components of the program, the chapel, the meeting hall, the library, the classrooms, whereas in 1968, all of that is jammed up together into one sort of assembly, collapsing that distinction between the different roles that the sisters were playing. And so it really, at a fundamental level, evokes, the idea of what this Dominican order is about. And so the 4 core ideas of this project were the idea of the society of the rooms, how they come together and form open space, and how they join each other. The idea of spatial archetypes, almost like the Nalanda plan, that each of these program elements were made out of very, very sort of simple organizations. And this is true for a lot of Khan's plans. The idea of spatial binaries of, servant and served, or individual and collective, and how they're distinct. And one of the interesting things about that is the structure and light idea, that the rooms where the sisters stay have large windows. They look out onto the courtyard. And so the structure, actually the organized sense of how the light is coming in, whereas all of these common facilities that are in the courtyard have no windows at all and are all top lit. And so the structure there very different in terms of how light is brought into these communal shared elements. I'm going to end with, so this is Akbar's tomb in Sikandra, which is my favorite, one of my favorite buildings. The idea that a building can evoke the transition from the physical to the metaphysical, that as you make your way through these embellished gatehouses, that you then come finally to a room where there is no light, where your eye is defied. And so you're then transported to a place where all of your other senses are heightened, a place of incredible repose, a place of incredible meaning. I'm going to end with a small clip. It's 5 minutes long. This is the clip from Doshi's film, the film that we made on Doshi in 2009. My brother Premjit Ramachandran directed it. He also made all the music and edited it. I hope you enjoy it.
Whole idea is, if it is a sustainable building, it should use everything which is available from almost waste. And all this is done by the local people. This is all done. I told them just do what you like. I gave them pieces. So they wanted, this is Amitabh Bachchan for them. This is where you enter. Very small, inconspicuous entrance. Not a royal entrance, no portico, nothing, a little courtyard. It's like a domestic entrance. And the entrance here is even like that, it's very simple.
Why can't it become a public space? So you're talking about public and private, form versus formlessness, growth and other things, and yet it has to be a studio. And then you talk about partly above, partly below ground. All this happened.
Oops.
We can try. I think now you can shoot my granddaughter. Let us see my darling daughter. Had made this building by chance, the extension. The building happened because I had to make this into non-agricultural land. And so I had to find something. Yeah. So the neighbor had only curved sheets. So I said, overnight, let me make the curved sheets and make a plan. So I made a plan and I made the roof and I got my stamp. But then I said, my God, how nice this is. So always there are clues. We must be aware to use them. So you can get the sense of all these spaces. And these buildings insert into this, as if that this building is going in. It moves like this. And this is, you can see the old sample. And it's north-south. And then I get a very big garden here. Again, this is against Vastu. This is west. And this is south. So one Vastu chap came here and he saw this. He says, are you going to have some trouble? I said, no. He said, you never had any problem? I said, no. In fact, I have been successful. After once he comes back and says, you are right. This is where Dhirubhai Ambani's entrance is. This is Vastu. I said, why don't I make a village? And that's what I like, a tree, a garden, the steps. And that's how it began to happen. Then one day made those arches and then became. And again, it has all the West products. It has China mosaic, which was never used before. It has Gaudi, it has Wright, everything is there. It is like a good food that you enjoy, which is done by the best chefs. But you are the one who is digesting this, and you have to convert that into your blood and your life. And what I do is only follow this biological order. Borrow everything and finally become yourself. And that Gandhiji's idea that, look, open the windows, but see that your roof is not blown out. The foundations have to be strong. So you have to be deep inside an Indian who is frugal, who can invent, who can take a chance, and who can starve. There is a student here from Stuttgart, who is working here. I was talking her about Indianness, and she mentioned something very interesting. He says, Indianness is in riding in the bus or in the train. In the train, there are no windows which are closed. We are very ambiguous outside. I think that is India. Turning and the air is flowing all the time, everywhere, and you are partly inside and partly outside. I think that is India. And not only but this way, physically, philosophically also. We are very ambiguous, more or less. I may come, I may not come.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Bijoy, for the wonderful insight. Since you have concluded with a short film on Doshi that you were a part of in terms of making it, and there's also a question raised here: what is how important is to have a mentor? For an architect, both in terms of your education and in terms of practice. And though you have mentioned it in a couple of your lectures that you have given, and also in a couple of interviews, but probably you can talk about it again. How important is influence?
Well, I don't want to generalize it. I mean, different people work in different ways. For us, I don't know, maybe this is a reflection of our own education. We had, maybe one, I would say that maybe we had two really good teachers when we were in college. But by and large, for the 5 years that we were in college, we had very little instruction. We were left to our own devices. It wasn't a semester system. We had one full year. So oftentimes we'd have one project for a whole year. And so it's very relaxed, you have a lot of time to do other things. And so you're really, I mean, for some of us, we were floundering, we didn't know, I mean, our seniors would be our guides. And so they would point us, they would say, you have to go to Ahmedabad and check out the studio there, or check out the library, or, meet this guy, he's an amazing guy. And so we'd be constantly seeking, advice and suggestions from others, because we weren't really given much direction formally. So I think it's particular for us, and so for me, this notion of hanging out with Dr. Doshi, or even with Richard and Peter, Richard Leplastrier, the great sage of a man. On the one hand, of course, there are direct lessons to be drawn with their work and with architecture, but I think there's a larger sort of idea of how they live their lives, what values they have, and we are constantly looking at that as the ideal that can I get to that point, And so I think it's useful to just, even if you don't use any of the stuff that you get from them, to be exposed to these voices, of people who have, reached a certain point in their life, have achieved a certain quality, that you want to know what they're about, how they operate, etc.
When going through your work and the kind of vocabulary that you have used, seems like your work is there is a lot of phenomenology involved. You talk about experience, you talk about sensations, you talk about senses, you talk about awareness. If all an object amounts to is collection of a sensation, um, yeah, and we have a sensorial approach similar to, I've heard this before also when I was a student in Professor Doshi's lecture. I think I was in second year, and he says, certain objects, they give you certain feeling, pick them up and use them. And I took a note in my book, and every time I would sort of get stuck, I would start thinking about, about a feeling or a sensation associated with a form, or or an object. So what has been his influence, or how has this approach influenced your attitude? Not just him, this approach, phenomenological approach, has influenced your attitude towards your work.
Before Doshi, we had of course, there's Anil Dubey and Dinesh Verma, two teachers who taught me. But there were also a group of architects here in Bangalore. There's the Kanade brothers, Sharad Padalkar, Prem Chandavarkar, Edgar Di Mello. And even much earlier than Palasma talking about phenomenology, maybe Christian Norberg Schulz, even, referring to him, that the work and Kanade's work is all about that you create, Kanade has, let me rephrase, Kanade has this amazing story that Doshi told, that he tells us about Doshi, that when he was working in Doshi's office, this is in Dun House before he had moved to Sangath, and he was struggling with this plan. He just joined the office and Kanade is struggling with the plan, and so Doshi tells him something that maybe, you tell your second year students or first year students. He says, when you're drawing the plan, just imagine yourself in that plan. You're moving from this room to this room. What kind of scale does it have? What kind of light does it have? And so to get the student to appreciate that that's the beginning of things, that the imagination of occupation, the imagination of experience, that the sensorial qualities of a place are where you begin. Now, of course, that's only the start of things. There are two aspects to this. We had a wonderful architect called Madhusudan who came here from Hyderabad for an exhibition of his work. And he said there are two ideas here, and this is really what Khan's talking about as well, about form and design. That on the one hand is design, which is all of this stuff, the physical ramifications of your choices. There's climate, there's the client, there's budget, there are all of these circumstances and contingencies which you're addressing with the project that you've got. Also the idea of phenomenology, that you're trying to create a space of a certain quality physically. But before you get to that, it's like Itmatu Duala's tomb, that you're making a conscious decision about where you're going with this experience. What kind of experience do you want to evoke? And what is the meaning of that experience? What is publicness? What does it mean to be in a public space? What kind of scale is it? Now, if you look at Korea's public buildings, they're incredibly intimate. They're not Monet, no? They're not like this big building which has a big facade and is completely different in terms of articulation. Korea has a different idea of what publicness means. So if you go to Kala Academy or any of these public buildings, they're immediately accessible for anyone. They feel like they're your space. So at an individual, so it's a different way. So as an architect, I think on the one hand is the idea of phenomenology and this kind of sensorial approach. But I think much before that, and abstractly, one is asking the question of what is it you want to say? What is this building about? What kind of quality am I trying to evoke? And then all of the choices fall into place because of that. These experiential choices.
The nature of the building.
The nature of things.
The nature
yes.
of
Yeah, that's right. It's easier said than done because oftentimes, yeah. I mean, even Khan, when that's the wonderful thing about this book, Michael Merrill's book on the Dominican Mother House, because you can see that Khan's starting wrong. Like he hasn't really figured out what it is he's doing because the plan doesn't capture essentially what the Mother House is about. And it is through the process of this engagement, and that's the central thesis of the book, that all of us as architects, the more viscerally engaged we are with the commission, the architect, I mean the client, the consultant, the contractor, the site, the more evolved and sensitive the proposal will be, that it will then evoke the qualities that are embedded in this commission. And Khan's example is fantastic because it removes that Khan is here and he knows immediately what to do. Because over 2 years, he's struggling. And then at the fag end of the 2 years in 68 is when he gets that plan, which is the great plan. So that engagement is very, very important. Yeah. And the nature of things comes not at the beginning, but through that process.
Another thing, I mean, it's I'm just putting a lot of questions together that have come from students who want to understand, you know, how do you practice, how do you engage with your clients, how do you take care of your projects on site, how do you stick to a budget and the timeline. I would put that in a
Right.
sort of rephrase all the questions together.
Mm.
What is, I mean, how do you achieve excellence through practice?
Through
The
practice.
way excellence through practice.
Huh.
You're getting my point. What is your approach in terms of your office to arrive or to achieve the excellence that you achieve as an output of the project? You know, how do you organize yourself? You know, how do you sort of right from the conceptual stage to, you know, talking to the clients, the contract, the context, you know. So this is what people are trying to ask you, a lot of them. But in short, how do you achieve this excellence through practice?
Well, I don't have a quick answer to that question, because every project, I mean, we in a way, and this may not be a good lesson for students, but we start from zero in a way, you know, because every project brings with it a certain opportunity, but also a certain set of challenges. What is it? You know, we had a wonderful chat recently with Prasad Shetty, and what he said really rung true. You know, that in college somehow we find that the college environment is different from practice. That college environment is college environment, and then practice is a practice. You know, you're doing differently in that environment. And he said that actually, can we replicate, or can we make the college environment a form of practice? And what does that mean? It means that, you know, you're going to get all of this information. You're getting information from the clients. There's information from the site. There are these abstract things that are floating around in your head.
But is that a perception of the students or the people who are teaching? Because students won't understand the environment of the practice. So
no. So what he's trying to say is that, can we set up an ecosystem where it's kind of a simulacrum of practice? So unlike right now in most of the colleges, what happens is that the design studio operates independently, right? And then there are these silos. You study history, you study theory, you do building construction, you do structures, and they're all taught sort of as independent modules. At least that's the way it is here. And he said, can we bring to bear in the design studio, just like you would in practice, all of these lessons that you're drawing from these various other silos, you know, that you're taking from construction when it's pertinent, you're taking from history when it's pertinent, that you're bringing to bear this knowledge, which isn't separate, you know. And so, I mean, I don't know whether I'm anywhere close to answering your question, but the idea is that in practice, you're doing exactly what, you know, you're trying, or in education, you're trying to do exactly what you're doing in practice, which is that every time you get a new project, you have to quickly come to an understanding of what the conditions are. Like, who's this guy? What's this project about? What is his ambition? You know, and there's a wonderful essay that Khan wrote called "Of Mosquitoes and Donkeys" or something. That's the name of the essay. And he says that's the toughest thing for an architect, that you get into a room and the client is sitting there, and to understand whether the client is asking for the whole donkey, or he's asking only for the tail, or if he's asking for a mosquito, like a whole other genus of creatures, you know. And in your mind, you're already going into that room imagining that you're going to do the elephant, you know, like, oh man, this is going to be an amazing commission. But you're not listening to what the client is saying. You're not understanding the conditions, you know, of engagement. So I think excellence, I don't know about achieving excellence, but I think with every project, we're really trying to address the situation at hand in the most comprehensive way as possible, through you know, design exercises, through you know, engagements with our consultants, etc., so that it's not flippant and casual, that you're really sort of engaging.
The next question is, you know, sort of related to the crisis that we are facing right now.
Yes.
How do you see the nature of public spaces
Yes, I see that.
evolving?
Yes. It's a great question, and it's a question that I mean, this BIC luckily had 1 year of running and events, and now it's shut. It's been shut since, you know, March 24th. We had, I think the last event was sometime in early March. and it's indefinitely going to be closed. I mean, now BIC is doing most of their events online. I don't know the answer to this. What about public engagement and what of public space in the long term? Until there isn't a proper, a medicine or vaccine or something, I don't know. I mean, what the future of public congregation is. I mean, I saw this really crazy image of a theater in Berlin where they removed the seats between. There were like seats, apart from each other. They'd removed all of the chairs inside the auditorium. And I don't know if that's the future of our auditoria, that you have, in a 200-seat auditorium, you have a 50-seat capacity,
Yeah.
I don't know the answer.
Behind, again, I mean, this is coming from your lecture, the way
Yeah.
you presented, behind every perception, this is about how do you approach a project. Behind every perception, proposition and action, there lies an absolute presupposition. How do you, when you get a project, how do you sort of read it? What are your perceptions about the project, the site, the client? What are your propositions, and then what are the actions? And behind all of this, what is the core factor that sort of guides you, or something that is in your process, or something that is in your approach that you sort of.
Well, I wish, Manu, that it was that systematic. Often, so there
Because
are.
it's very consistently visible in your entire presentation, the way you I mean, a lot of drawings, they came right out of Form, Space, and Order. and Varki told us that that is one book that you always go back to and refer to whenever you're stuck. And then a lot of your drawings and projects, they qualify to be in that book. That's how systematically they have been sort of. I mean, you can just skim through the drawings and get a feel of it. So probably, I think for you, it's relevant to answer that question.
Well, there are two. I mean, I'm winging it here, but I'll say that there are two ways in which things come to us. Sometimes, like for instance, BIC. What has been really instructive about BIC is, and we had a wonderful guy at the office called Kiran, and we articulated what this project was about very early on in the process. What is publicness? So we started looking at a whole bunch of public buildings. What is the scale of a public building? What kinds of things do they evoke? And to get to the bottom of it, independent of what the client is telling us. I mean, we're doing this research on our own to try and understand what are people trying to do with public buildings, and what is it about a public building that really evokes a sense of community, a sense of congregation, etc. The same is true for the school. Of course, you start with the man under the tree because that's kind of the place to start. But then when you take that to the next level, what is it about that man under the tree? I mean, what is it about? And that's where Khan's quote is absolutely essential, because he talks about ego. And he says that the man under the tree is not the teacher, and the guy sitting at the foot of the thing is not the student, but it's two people together, like, friends chatting, outside in the canteen. And suddenly you have an epiphany, and it's happened to all of us, suddenly something clicks and you're like, oh my God, that's what it means. How do you create an environment? And this is why great educational institutions like IIM Bangalore, or a lot of Sanjay Mohe's work, which is all about participatory space, they're so successful because they create various places for congregation that allow different kinds of people to congregate. Small places for intimate congregation and large places for large congregation. And there are all kinds of scales and volumes and things. So you start there as a fundamental, like, and luckily for us, when Kavita came to the project, she came with the same understanding about education. She said, I don't want classrooms. I need classrooms to show in my paperwork. But can you give me, in 35,000 square feet, can you give me maybe 60% of it outside, so that I can do other things? I can have yoga, I can do craft work, I can have TT tournament, so that it's completely flexible and I'm not stuck with corridors and rooms. And we were like, wow, this is great. We can start here. So that's one kind of project where you're coming at it with an understanding that may be away from the client. The second kind of project is where you're really struggling. You've got no ideas, the client's not giving you anything. The site doesn't really have too much to sort of, and there really it's a struggle. I mean, and to be absolutely honest, it's frustrating till you come to some point where, you know, something clicks, you know, and you're really clutching at straws. Most of the work is like that. I mean, to be absolutely honest, you're really sort of, and you keep going back to the site, maybe something you will see, you know, and you take your friend, anything that, you know, clicks, maybe, you know, there's a tree somewhere, or, you know, there's some particular condition, and that then starts driving the process. So I think the second one probably is what you're asking, and, you know, how do I find a way to operate when I don't have any ideas? And that happens often.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure the students are happy to hear that, because I guess the
Yeah.
feeling is mutual in this case. Yeah.
There's a wonderful TED talk by Elizabeth Gilbert. I don't know if you've seen it. She's the author of Eat, Pray, Love, which was a, you know, New York Times bestseller list, and it was on the bestseller list when she was barely 40 years old. So people would come up to her and say, "Oh my God, you know, commiserations, because, you know, you've got the New York Times bestseller at 40. How are you ever going to, you know, top this? You know, how are you going to get another one on this? And it's going to be this burden on your head." It's like Aravena getting the Pritzker. No? Now everybody's like watching, like, what's he going to do next? And she said, I have no pressure at all. I'm going to show up every day at work. I'm going to do my riyaz every day. And if the genie decides to come and whisper the magic incantation into my ear, so be it. If he doesn't come or she doesn't come, that's their loss, you know, because I'm here, I'm ready. Are you coming or not? You know, because it doesn't, and that's the other thing, you know, that the great idea doesn't come from me. So if the students can get that out of, you know, their system, that burden, the pressure that, you know, oh my God, you know, I need concept, or I need an idea and I don't have anything. That's an unrealistic pressure that you don't have to have. I mean, if you can just, there are certain, I'm sure in your college as well, there are certain, like Riyaz, no, you do certain things, assimilate information, you make certain kinds of drawings, you know, like in Khan's book, in Merrill's book, you can see Khan drawing out all of the program, like the room sizes, like we would do, you know, he's making the room size 20 by 20, or, you know, he's doing the cells. We have to go through that Riyaz, you know, and then something will happen.
Last question, can you just recommend, I mean, since you're so well read for an architect, 5 books for students to, or for architects to refer to, and 5 projects for students to refer to?
Well, with regards to books, actually, I won't recommend any books, but I'll recommend a lecture. So this is on, I think the website is Drawing Matters, and it's a lecture by Neil McLaughlin. So what I'll do is I'll send it to Mohit, and maybe he can post it to the people who participated today. Yeah. But Neil McLaughlin is the architect who did the workshop with us, and he has a wonderful lecture on reading and architecture. Mm-hmm. And that really tenuous link that reading doesn't necessarily make you a better architect, but maybe it makes you a better person, you know. Yeah.
No, Bijoy, we desperately need an up-to-date list for students to read. You know, I mean, we at SEP, we have a list from Worky.
Worky's list. Yeah.
Worky's list. So we are waiting for a new list to come out,
right.
At least for the students. So it would be nice to Mohit if you can mail.
Okay, I'll send him a lecture, and I'll send him some suggestions too. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Bijoy, with
yes.
Yeah, you want to say something?
No, you said something about projects as well. Like what people's projects in the country?
Yeah, students should sort of refer to, or, you know, projects that are inspiring to you, or you think that, you know, would help students sort of look at thoroughly. In Ahmedabad, they do look at, you know, they go to Sangha. Right. I mean, you know the list in Ahmedabad.
Yeah.
But in general.
Well, with regards to projects, I'd say that there are 2 books that you can look at, and there's one, and both these books are by Monet. And so one is Theoretical Anxiety and Design Strategies, where this is basically a collection of his Harvard lectures, where he takes, I think, 9 contemporary architects, his contemporaries. So Coulas and Aldo Rossi and Herzog and de Meuron, etc., Alvaro Siza, and he analyzes their work from his point of view. So it's a great book to see how someone is looking at someone else's work.
I think you mentioned the same book in your interview somewhere.
Maybe, yeah, and then there's another book by Monet, which is called 21 Works. And 21 Works, or Remarks on 21 Works, is him looking back at his own work, 21 of his projects, and trying to articulate the central question behind each of them. So how do you make buildings in a geologically important location? the question of typology, the question of integrating into an existing artifact, these sorts of things. So these two books are nice because they are a window into how you can critique someone else's work and look at projects critically, which we don't have much of in India, in terms of critical appraisal of current work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay. Bijoy, with that, I would sort of we'll come to an end, and I'll thank you for joining us, and I also thank all the participants. I hope we take this collaborations, this collaboration in the future, and probably we'll have more of you in different formats. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Banu, and thanks, Mohit. Thanks to the Intersection Foundation. Yeah. Bye, guys.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.